student of revival. Like, she follows it closely, and I'm gonna have to get used to my voice like this. Wow, like I'm booming. But so like she texts constantly. My mom she's been in a good amount of pain for a couple decades, so she sleeps about 2 hours a night. So she will text all of us all the time, and it's one of two things, right? It's a revival story somewhere on Earth, or it's another example of some destruction that's happening, which is yet more proof that we need revival somewhere on Earth, right? Like, and so if there's which is all true, right? Totally true. And so I'm going to say, now I'm going to get my dates wrong, but a week and a half ago, she knew nothing, in all her studies about revival, knew nothing about the Asbury revival of 1970. So she comes across it, she starts reading accounts of it, and the next day she's talking with Rita Sharoni, who says, yeah, there's a revival in Asbury. She says, no, Rita, that was 1970. And she says, no, it's going on right now. And this is like a day or two before the Super Bowl. And she's like, what? She starts reading it. So they're in charge of the Zap group. So they go to Zap, Super Bowl party, and the next day they go to Asbury. So my mom can't, handle long drives. There's no hotel room. So they get there, they get the last hotel room. They walk in, the place is packed, and she cannot climb stairs. They can't go sitting back, nothing. So they need a miracle, right? So they get in, and something happens where someone vacates like row 2. So they are sitting then, they end up sitting in like row 2, right from the stage, for about 7.5 hours. And she says there was one 15-minute message, and other than that, it was just praying, repentance, worship, praise. And she said the accounts I've read is there was just a peace that was everywhere. And she said, and so mom, and of course, dad always feels it, right? Like, but for when mom feels it, you're like, okay, that must be real, right? Like that's the way it is in my family. If you praying for my mom and dad, if you breathe on my dad's neck, he's going to fall over. But my mom, is going to take a sledgehammer, and that's kind of the way they are, and it's always been like that. Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's right.
You're the leader in the church.
You're already saved, and you're not a prostitute, so there's no reason. Yeah, that's dad. So they were, they talked about it like it was awesome. They come back, and in a weird quirk, Tim's heading out of town with his family. Harry's heading out of town with his family, and Kevin's got some kind of family thing, right? And Harry texts and says, hey, Scott, or just be ready. I think something's going to happen. And I'm like, so I really want this, but, behind the scenes, what I'm feeling is a mixture of excitement and pressure, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the whole, pastor, are you going to bring the revival here? I'm like, how does one do that, right? If I could snap my fingers and there's revival, I would have done that already. So, right, exactly, right? And I'm not, I have a wide level of comfort with a lot of different things, right? I'm not the guy who is the most, I wish I was, more, like, you ever meet people that walk in and they're like, oh, the Spirit's here. Or someone walks past, and you might be like this, Janet. Someone walks past, and you're like, they're struggling with something. Yeah, that's not me. I wish it was me. My wife and I went to New Orleans for a vacation, right? New Orleans. What's the name of that main street? New Orleans. So we're on Bourbon Street. I'm staring at voodoo places. I feel nothing. I didn't have a difficult devotion. Everything was normal for me. And I'm like, that's bad, probably. Sometimes I think God puts me in a bubble, right? Like he puts me in a bubble. They really, this guy needs a lot of hope. He needs, right? Yes, exactly. And so I'm half excited and half panicked, to be real honest with you. And so worship starts, and that's going well. And Kevin let's ask Nate Pankey to kind of be our what I call the MC, but what it is someone like, okay, there's something, Spirit of God, are you saying something? Well, coincidentally, if you believe in that, we had set up to have prophetic ministry after church, like organized prophetic ministry. So we had teams available, and I'm kind of nervous about that because while sometimes I think I preach good, I might give the worst altar calls I know. It's ridiculous. Like, I will say, hey, if you want to come up for prayer, and crowds of people stay away from my altar calls, they'll come up and say, great message, learned a lot. But so we've organized multiple prophetic teams. I'm like, oh, dear Jesus, please help. That's how I felt, right? And so Nate gets up, and he has Julie Henry, if you guys know her from, she's with G-Hop. She gives a word, and she's crying, just saying Jesus is here. And then Rachel Pankey gives a word, and Lynette Lang gives a word, and there's just this, like they're starting. And then Nate says, hey, we're going to start praying for healing. And so they start praying for healing, and people there's like crying and like kind of like flirting with weeping, right? Like, you know what I mean? But it was like I was praying, and like I wasn't I'm losing time on my message, right? And so normally I'd be a little anxious then, but I wasn't feeling that, right? I was like, I could sit here all day. I don't need to talk. But I felt like the Lord said, you need to, I'm going to have some time for you to give the message. So that goes on for a while, and I give up and give my message, and afterward I just feel like, it feels like people are telling me, like, I had a dream about that exact passage last night. It was weird. So I give my altar call, and I do a terrible job. And then Alyssa comes up, Alyssa Ray, and she re-gives the altar call, and there's like 60 people in line, something like, maybe, I get my numbers bad, but for prophetic ministry, and that goes on for a long time. And so I'm just, there. And so, people are just kind of lingering, and the worship is going on, and I'm there, and then they come down and get me because, of course, they can't start the meal. We're having a Connect Sunday, right? They can't start the meal without me praying. So I get up out of the prayer, I walk downstairs with a perfectly good attitude, and pray, and then walk back up there, right? But, like, I felt like I did almost everything wrong, but it felt like God was there. And that was what you said for me is it feels different. Like, I'm a devotion guy. Like, I like that, right? And it's been good for 2 decades, but it's different right now. It just is different. Like, when I sit down and I'm reading and I'm praying, it's different. Like, it didn't take me a long time, it felt like, to really get in the presence of God before, but it's like minuscule amounts of time. Now, if I focus for 20 seconds, like, bam, oh, wow, hey. That's how I feel, right? Like, and I'm super subjective, but it's just, there's a difference to it. Okay. So then later on that night, they have youth ministry. Zap is going on, and it's supposed to end at 8:30. They skip mini groups because they start worshiping, and the junior high boys, this is how you know it's revival, right? The junior high boys, they start gathering and praying for one another. And so, yeah, at 9:55, so it ends at 8:30. At 9:55, Dad says, you all have school tomorrow. We got to shut this down. Turns out they didn't have school tomorrow because it was President's Day, right? Right, but like they were, it was the normal mixture of people were really into it, and there was some that were into it but were now bored, and some that were bored the whole time. That kind of normal mixture, but like praying and worshiping for an hour and a half extra and skipping mini group, that's not normal for us, right? So it was exciting. It was exciting and exhausting, and I went home and I crashed. I was like, yes, and Don Williams was there, and
Yeah, I saw his thing on Facebook. I was like, well, what's going on at church?
yeah, he Don, he walks up and he has that kind of knowing.
Yeah.
It's a start. I'm like, I have no idea. I hope, right? But like it's it certainly seems like nationally, kind of like you're saying, Vic, is there's something going on. Some kind of stirring, and certainly everything's a mess, so it's a good time. Right? I mean,
Getting messier.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
The conviction of sin and come together, and
I hadn't seen that one. There's a lot going on in Iran from a revival perspective?
Yeah.
Or with people coming to the Lord?
yeah. Wow. Right now, statistically, percentage-wise, they're the fastest growing church in the world now.
Christian church in Iran.
In Iran.
Wow.
Now.
Yeah, but start with one.
Right. You only have two people.
That's a good point. Do the math, Scott. I got it. Right.
But it's in the thousands.
Right.
Which
It's worldwide. A lot of love, a lot of Jesus. The 2 Corinthians, those guys are great.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
so anyway,
What about those Corinthians?
so we have
Our
two
segue tonight.
Yeah. Well, so, yes. So speaking of 2 Corinthians 8, that's where we're at, right? 2 Corinthians 8, good. Yeah, so Vic originally assigned me, was it week 9?
It was next week.
It was next week, and so I'm going on a prayer retreat on Monday. And so Vic's like, well, you could just take the week before if you want. That's me. I was like, sure, and I didn't look at it. Dear God, I wish I wouldn't have changed. Chapter 8.
I want you to know, I hate talking about money and giving and all that stuff.
Have you guys read through chapter 8? Yeah, right. It feels like this isn't right. I know this is not right because it's in the Bible. This is Paul's manipulation of the Corinthian church to make a big offering. That's what it feels like, and that's the message I get to give right here. So get out your checkbooks and wait for revival, because here, right.
Better you than me.
Right. I was reading through it multiple times, like, huh. Yeah. So, anyways, I was challenged on multiple times, including opinions about people taking offerings that I've had in the past, where it feels like, well, I slowed down that because, Paul. Well, we'll get to it. So I want to set the background, and then we'll read through it, and if that's okay. And you know what I've discovered? It is more intimidating giving background on historical facts with Vic in the room than it is 250 people. I can make crap up. No one will know. Is it really? So between you two, I'm sure I'm wrong somewhere, but you're right. Right, exactly. Forgive me. So just a brief background. You probably have gone over this, particularly with regards to Paul and maybe Corinth as well. But when I was reading this, it's supposed to be about the year 57 AD, somewhere around that when Paul's writing 2 Corinthians, okay? And he's writing this one from Philippi, which is in a Macedonian colony of the Roman Empire. 1 Corinthians, he writes just a few months or like a year earlier. It's not very long, right? And in 1 Corinthians, he's kind of mad, and it makes sense that he's mad, right? He's mad because the Corinthian church has a lot of sin in it. He's mad because the Corinthian church has a lot of division in it. And more than that even, like they're beginning to reject him, right? And so they're mocking him and so on and so forth. And so he kind of ticked, and he writes from Ephesus this letter to the Corinthians, which we call 1 Corinthians. And it's kind of a hit you over the head kind of letter, okay? So I think he sends it by the hand of Titus. I'm not sure, but let's act like that's true. He's waiting for Titus to come back with the response, and he's in Ephesus, okay? So he's got this, what he says is he's got a wide open door in Ephesus for the gospel and lots of adversaries, right? And so you see that in Acts 19, where Paul gets in trouble with the Ephesians for something to do with the temple Artemis and Diana, and he's running them out of business, so on and so forth. And he ends up saying, fine, I'm out of here. I'm leaving Ephesus. And so he goes to Troas, and it says, I got a wide open door here. But then he says, but I had no rest in my spirit, because Titus was apparently supposed to be there, come back with the message from the Corinthian church. He never shows up. So he keeps going, and he ends up in Philippi, which is this Macedonian place, right? And I think, this is probably not true, I think when I've read through Paul, he has a lot of difficult situations, right? Whether prison, beaten. This feels emotionally like his darkest moment. Like when you read it, he's talking about, I've got fears within, and I'm hard-pressed without. I'm caring about. He uses, his language, but it sounds like he's depressed, right? To me, that's what it sounds like. He's really struggling, right? And then Titus shows up. And the good news is, so he's very happy to see Titus, and the Corinthian church has responded very favorably to his letter, right? That's 2 Corinthians 1 through 7. You guys have gotten that. Chapter 8 is where he's basically going to make a big push for finances, okay? Now, they're raising finances for Jews and Christians in Judea. This is correct? Right. And they're having a big problem because in roughly 50 AD, Claudius has kicked all the Christians and Jews out of Rome, right? And it's now 57 AD, so it's Nero. So there's a lot of persecution going on for these Christians in Jerusalem and Rome. So they're trying to raise money for it, right? Macedonia is, we can see this from here, they're oppressed and they're poor. Yeah. That's what we know about them. Now Corinth was destroyed in like 144 BC, rebuilt in like 44 BC by Julius Caesar. And very quickly it becomes a governmental seat of Rome and an economic seat, a Greek economic seat too. So it's got government and economy, and it's kind of wealthy, right? And when you read about it, I was reading a lot of quotes about it even today, and there was a lot of vice available in Corinth. If you wanted vice, if you wanted sin, Corinth was a place to go, apparently, right? It's the Vegas, right? It's Bangkok. Right. And so, but theoretically, and it certainly makes sense from the context of 2 Corinthians 8, they got money as well. Okay? So it's a Christian church. They're trying to grow in the midst of a lot of sin and probably lots of money and just a lot of trade going back and forth. And the Judean Christians are in trouble. Paul realizes, okay, they don't hate me. He's been talking 7 chapters. And the end of chapter 7, he's basically like, I'm encouraged because Titus was encouraged when you encouraged him. And yay, everybody's encouraged. And he launches into chapter 8. Now, here's where we get this, okay? So will anyone, is it okay, do you guys have someone else read? Yeah. Okay, good. So someone want to read verses 1 through 5 for me.
I can do it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Now, brethren, we wish to make by the will of God.
Now, pause there for a second because he's about to ask them for money. What does it sound like he's saying to you there?
The other guy's getting.
Right. Okay, I'm about to ask you for money, but before I do, I'm going to tell you this story about the poor guys. And I love it. He says they gave above and beyond with great liberality. And then it says they begged us to give. Right? Man, this feels like the guilt trip waiting to happen. But you can understand it. Because I want you to think for a second about Jesus sitting across from the treasury, right? The story of the widow who puts in 2 copper coins, right? And he says, rightly so, she gave more than everyone else, right? And you can even understand that mathematically. As a percentage of her, she gave 100% of her assets, where everyone else is walking up and they're probably giving 10% because they're Pharisees, right? 10% of their income, she gave 100% of her assets. So as a percentage, it's a huge amount, right? But the problem is he actually needs money. So if you've got a whole room full of widows with 2 copper coins, they could be giving 100% of their assets, but it's just not enough money, right? You need more, right? And the Corinthian church has some, theoretically. You think this is right? Okay, so he's got this guilt trip going. It's the way it feels to me. That's not right to say. I'm sure that's wrong. But it's like, okay, before I ask, the Macedonians, they gave a lot. They gave a lot of money, and it was way beyond their ability, and they begged us to do it. Right? Okay, so now let's read 6 through 8. Okay, stop there for just a second. What does that sound like he's saying there? Yeah. What?
Yeah.
So what does that feel like to you? Like he's just said Macedonians are great. Now he's saying, you guys are awesome in everything. Like it almost feels like, right? 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 Like that's what I'm like. I'm reading through this. I'm like, this can't be in the Bible. It can't want me to read 2 Corinthians 8. Why did I switch the weeks? But he says, so he's getting ready to ask them, and he says, so apparently they had begun to gather in the Corinthian church about a year ago. They had begun to gather their offering that they're going to send. Right? Again, let's act like this is the rich church, and the Macedonians the poor church. They gave liberally, but it's $5 liberally, and the Corinthians got all the money. Okay? So he says, we're going to continue this, but he says, and you guys are great, and I'm looking at verse 7. You abound in everything, in faith, in utterance, in knowledge, in earnestness, in love. We inspired in you. So also do this thing. Now, look at verse 9. So he says, the Macedonians have given a ton. I want you guys to give. Now read 9. So I'm reading through this, and this is what it felt like to me. It's like he said, the Macedonians have given a ton. Right? I want you guys to give. And oh yeah, that Jesus guy, he gave everything. Like, that's what it feels like. I'm sure that's not the right way to look at it, but that's kind of what it feels like. Okay, so he goes on now. And from verse 10, my first struggle is how Paul approaches it, because I've heard this before. I've been in meetings when I was a kid growing up. I've been in meetings where some of them, they felt weird in offerings, right? Like, you ever been in that one? Hey, how many of you guys are going to give $200? And they wait to, how about $500? And they have them stand up. Like, and like even as a young kid, I was like, uncomfortable with it, right? Right. And so, yeah. That's a good point, right? Yes, right.
What about those loved ones that are in purgatory?
Yes. What is purgatory? Don't worry about it. But they're there, and they need out. Yeah, so, yes. So there, I mean, Vic and I would probably, we're uncomfortable talking about money, right? It's not a safe topic for a preacher in the U.S. Like, it just feels weird, if I could say it like that. And that's, yeah. Even then, right? Well, I guess not. I don't know. Yeah.
And you've noticed I've never talked about it.
Right.
I just avoid it like the plague.
Yeah.
But it's really important.
Well, that's the funny thing. It's not biblically accurate to skip.
No, it's not.
Because it's all over the place, but we're uncomfortable talking about it. Well, I am and you are. Harry does it better. We should have stuck him with chapter 8. Okay. All right. Right. Okay, so then he says, verse 10, I give my opinion in this matter, for it's your advantage, who were the first to begin a year ago, not only to do this, but also desire to do it, but now finish doing it, just as there was the readiness, so that you may also complete by your ability. For if the readiness is present, it's acceptable according to what a man has, not according to what he doesn't have. Okay, so he's basically saying, I want you to complete what you promised a year ago. Okay, you were mad at me a few months ago, but now everything's good, and I want you, because he's been actually boasting about, hey, wait till the Corinthian offering comes in, we're going to be, that's what he kind of implies, when the Corinthian offering comes in, we're going to be good. But think about it, like if there's a bad relationship there, he's not 100% sure what he's been boasting about is going to come through. Now he's saying, I urge you to do this. And by the way, Macedonians did amazing, and Jesus gave everything. This is not a command, I'm just suggesting. That's what he says, right? It feels weird to me. It gets weirder for me, okay? Because verse 13, all right, I'm going to say this before we get to verse 13. In law school, one of the most surprising, there were many surprising days. One of them was we read Karl Marx, portions of Karl Marx. Any guys ever read Karl Marx? So I didn't read the whole thing, but my first impression of the section I read was, the portion they assigned us to was, it sounded like the book of Acts to me. Like, I know that's weird to say. It's super weird to say.
Communist, kind of communal.
It's really what, exactly. Like the philosophy behind it sounded like we want to make sure we're taken care of. Right? It was very anti-capitalist. Thank you. Stumbled over my words. And like a good American, I'm, of course, free market, right? And I'm not leaving that. But Paul doesn't say, well, we're going to give because they're here. Listen to what he says. It flirts with the book of Acts. So when I was reading Mark's, it was, we're going to pull off that kind of book of Acts stuff, but we don't need God to do it. That's what it felt like, right? That's exactly what it felt like, right? We're God, man's God. We created this problem. We can handle it. We're going to, out of the generosity and goodness of our hearts, because we're humans and we're good, and therefore inherently good, which is the problem, right? That's the key. That's the problem. We're going to handle this. And so it reads like, remember in the book of Acts, and the people would come and they would lay it by the apostles, they would sell their property, lay it at the apostles' feet, and Vic would distribute to each as they had need, and everyone had plenty, right? So if you think about it, it's very anti-capitalistic. It's some level. That's not a right thing to say here, but
Kind of voluntarily.
it's a voluntary socialism. It's a kind of a weird way of saying it.
Right, because your heart's converted and now you're wanting to help your fellow, community members.
That's the kibbutz version.
Right.
Yes.
It's the Jewish kibbutz, but it's not,
That
but
was
it's
the
not
thing with
forced.
Ananias and Sapphira, is they were
Yep.
not
Yep.
obliged to do it, firstly, and secondly, whatever they did, whether it be a small portion of it, or they lied about what they did. So
Right.
they were not compelled to do it, and they lied about it. So
Right.
it was never this, well, you have to sell everything.
Yeah.
You weren't obliged to do that.
Yeah, I've always been under the impression that if Ananias and Sapphira had said, we're giving 80% of our sale and we're going to keep 20 because we're going on a big vacation, they'd have been fine. It's what they did was, I think anyway, they said, we gave this 100%, and they'd actually given 80. Which was pretty amazing to begin with if they'd have kept their mouth shut. Right, okay. Right. So read 13 through 16, somebody, if that's okay.
Our desire is not that gathered little did not have too little. I thank God.
Okay, stop there for just a second. So perfect. How many times does he say equality in there, right? It's kind of weird, isn't it, if you think about it? So basically, so far, what he has said is, okay, now that we're good, right? The Macedonians gave a ton of money. I want you guys to give. Keep in mind, Jesus gave everything. And what we want is everybody to be equal, right? We want, right now, Corinthian church, you guys have money, they don't. You should give because we want some equality. And who knows, someday they'll have abundance and you'll be in lack, and then they'll need to give to you. I'm uncomfortable with it as a earthly philosophy, but here's the thing. That's what the kingdom of heaven's going to be like. It's not going to be, when we're in heaven, Brian's loaded in a mansion and Scott's sitting there in some kind of stick hut, and Brian's like, dude, you should have worked harder, right? It's not going to be like that, right? It's not going to be a democracy. We're not going to be voting for Peter, and Paul's running opposing him, right? It's not going to be like that. It's going to be a monarchy, right? Yeah, all right, I know. I know you would.
Give me the skateboard, that's good.
Yes. You have to understand, in all of our meetings with Vic, it is painful because Vic is very comfortable and ready for everything to fall apart. And I'm like, if someone drops the big one, it's just drop it on my head, because what am I going to do? Like, I have no practical abilities whatsoever. So.
You can all go away for God or just make people happy.
Yeah, I'm a wood spinner. I should have gone to the class with Jerry.
Spin wood.
Don't ever call him a cop.
Okay, so we shift from there, and now Paul shifts into, and I love how he does this. The rest of the verses are about the practicalities of how he's going to handle it. So first, I actually want to read verse 21 first, because I think verse 21 is Paul saying why he's saying the rest of these verses. So I'll read 21. It says, "For we have regard for what is honorable, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of the men." So he's kind of saying like this. He's saying, I'm paying attention to not only what God thinks is honorable, which would be integrity, which is generosity, which is cheerful giving. I also want it to be honorable. I want you, Jerry to feel good about the way this gift is going and going to be distributed. Okay? So listen, it's kind of strategic and kind of weird at the same time. So he really is. Like, I didn't see this side before. They say 2 Corinthians is his most emotional letter. You think that?
I think so.
Yeah. And you can understand why. He came out of depression, and now, like, I'm making that up. But if he was really in a dark place, and now he's starting to feel encouraged a little bit, and maybe he's feeling a little better, okay? So he's going to send some guys with the gift, all right? So first is verse 16. Oh, wait, verse 16 and 17. Anyone got that?
Thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same enthusiasm and on his own initiative.
Okay, so person number one who's going to go to this get the gift and distribute is Titus. Paul trusts Titus. That's what he's saying. Now, here's my I love the second guy. The second guy is verse 18 through verse 20. I'm sending this guy as well. Anyone got that section?
And we have sent with him the brother whose praise is in the Amos in this lavish gift which is administered by us.
So what does it sound like he's saying to you? He's sending what? A famous guy. He's sending someone who everybody knows. He's sending Billy Graham. So far, he's sending Titus, who I trust, and Billy Graham, who you all know. Yeah. Okay? Now, because he says, verse 21, because I'm paying attention to what is honorable before God and what is honorable to man. And so when he's done giving his list of who goes, you're going to be like, okay, I can trust this group. Okay? Look at the third group. Look at the third person. This is verse 22. Yeah, it's just verse 22. Anyone got that one?
In addition, we are sending with them our brother, who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you.
So my translation says diligent, right? So he's sending an accountant. So with the gift, like this is Nancy. He's sending Nancy Gerst. So he's sending Titus, who he trusts, Billy Graham, who you all know, and a Christian accountant. And Nancy Gerson, right? And so if you think about it, you're giving this money, you be like, I can trust that group, right? Because there's at least one of them. Billy Graham probably has nothing to do with the finance, but it's Billy Graham, right? Like, you trust Billy Graham, right? If you know Nancy, okay, you want a bean counter there. You want someone who's diligent is what they're describing. And Titus is the guy he's got a heart like mine. So I'm going to raise all this funds, and we're going to send it by the hands of these men, because I'm going to pay attention to what God finds honorable, but I want you guys to feel okay with this gift too, right? Confident, right? And it kind of, when I think about it like that, I can understand it, right? And so when I think about, from the Corinthians perspective, like, okay, we were mad at you and you were mad at us about 4 months ago, and now you want my money. But at the same time, like, think of it from Paul's perspective. He's got needs. He's trying to, like, at one level, it's from their perspective, a global church, and there's guys in a lot of trouble. He needs the Corinthians' money. Like, as bad as that sounds, at one level, it's true. And so what he is saying is, the Macedonians gave a lot. Jesus gave a lot. You guys, you've got to come through. I've been bragging about you. I want them to see it, and we need it. You've got to be generous here. But I want to do this for you, too. I'm going to set it up in such a way that you know that Margaret's not just milking it, right? She's not just, staying in the Ritz on the way to Jerusalem, eating up the money, right? I'm going to send Billy Graham, an accountant, and Titus, and then it ends up with, verse 24, therefore, openly before the churches, show them the proof of your love and of the reasons that we've been boasting about you. And that is the end. He says, I've been bragging about you. Don't let me down. So it's kind of a weird chapter, to be honest with you. It felt super weird. It was all about, manipulation wasn't the right word. It's where I started. But you know what reminded me of in a pure way? I had a lot of thoughts of, okay, that shyster and that shyster. But you know what reminded me of in a real way, Vic? Abraham of India. You guys all know him? When he comes, every time I listen to him, I'm like, man, he's got a lot. Right? He started 40 gazillion churches and 4,000 churches, he got widow, right, and all of these things. But when he, like, if you listen to him, he will say, he's very open about it. He'll stand up, he says, I'm going to give you a good message. I want you to pay attention. This is for you. But I'm here for money, right? Like, you guys have the money. You're the Americans. I come here for money because I need money, because in India, where I've got 4,000 churches, we don't have any money, and we're in a lot of trouble, right? And you're like, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it's not shyster at all. It's someone who cares about the churches. Like it's Paul.
And it's true needs.
It's true needs, right? Yeah.
Right. So that these people can have bread.
Well, in support of what you're saying, he even says there, because he references the passage in the Old Testament, I think the one with manna, and he says, he who gathered much didn't have too much. And he who gathered little had plenty. He wasn't saying everyone gathered the same. He's saying that when you gathered, it was appropriate to the needs you had. And so the Sipes would theoretically need more food than currently the Gersons, right? Because of the current makeup of the family. So your point is well taken. Equality is not equality. I love you. Thanks, guys.